And we're live.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Pillars 3 advisory meeting. I'm Olivia Pearson, Supervisor of College Readiness and for Prince George's County Public Schools, and I am serving as the chair for the committee. And we will introduce ourselves, all of our committee members, and then we will have time for our invited guests to introduce themselves as well. So we will start with Dave, co-chair.
Hello, everybody. Dave Harper from Chesapeake College on Maryland's Eastern Shore. Pass to Kirk.
Good afternoon, everyone. Kirkland Murray, the local workforce development director for Anne Arundel County, Maryland, and also president of the Maryland Workforce Association, which is the association of the 13 local workforce boards in the state of Maryland.
I can go next. This is Nona Carroll, Deputy Director of the Maryland Business Roundtable for Education. And I believe Robin is here.
Hi, everyone. Robin Werner, Talbot County Public Schools CTE Supervisor. And I'm going to pass it to Danielle Haley, who I invited as a guest here today.
Hi, I'm Danielle Haley, Talbot County Public Schools, and I oversee apprenticeships for TCPS.
Thank you, Danielle. So let's hand it over to Molly to introduce herself. And I think Richard was here as well from MSDE.
Molly Mesnard, Deputy Director of the CTE Committee in the Governor's Workforce Development Board, and Rachel Stevens Parker is also here from the Governor's Workforce Development Board.
Hi, everyone. Rachel Stevens Parker, Executive Director of the Governor's Workforce Development Board. It's nice to be joining you today. Thank you for having us.
Hi, everyone. I am Richard Kincaid. I work with MSD. I'm the Senior Executive Director of College and Career Pathways. Kind of feel like I'm crashing this party today, but always glad to see y'all and love being part of the conversation.
Thank you. You're never crashing. You're always invited, always invited. Okay, so we have other guests as well. And so I'm going to go with the first person I see, and then if you can punt it to someone else that has not introduced themselves. Adam?
Hi, I'm Adam Perry. I'm the CTE Supervisor for Washington County Public Schools. And who's left? I don't know. I'll go to Bill. See if Bill's done.
Thank you, Adam. My name's Bill Rocks, and I'm the Dean of Career Education at Allegheny College of Maryland. So, and I'm glad to be here today. Hopefully I'll learn something.
Hi, I am Rebecca Brand. I'm Director of CTE for Charles County Public Schools. I think I might be the last.
I think you're right. We're going to end with Rachel A. with the AIB to provide some updates for us.
Hi there, thank you. And I will be fast because I know our agendas have been packed here recently. Just a couple of quick updates. I wanted to let everybody know that our 24 LEAs have recently submitted their first Part 1, the system-wide response that they needed to submit on Friday, March 15th. So those are all in, and we are getting ready to go through our review process for those, but they're available on our websites. So you can find them on the implementation plan page, and on the left-hand navigation bar, there's a tab for LEA plans. So in each plan, you'll click on the county name and you'll go in and see 2023 documents and then a folder for 2024. So they've not yet been reviewed. That will take some time to get those done. And again, it is Part 1 with Part 2 due in May 1st. And then some of our big focus area work related to Pillar 3 recently has been around career counseling. So I just wanted to give a quick update on our end. We were able to get some guidance out to all of the partners who are on the MOU, the local workforce board, the LEA, and the community college, just to give everybody some check-in update information mid-year. And then we also let them know that we'd be scheduling check-ins. Those begin this week, and we'll be meeting with every group, every MOU partner to review the MOUs, any items that were implementation plan related that we said we were saving to check in on until implementation had really begun. So we're looking forward to hearing from all of our partners about this first year of implementation. We know that it's not easy to create a new program and that these are new relationships that have been forged around career counseling. So we're excited to have these conversations and to check in while the program is still underway in year one. And then on that note, I'd like to pass it over to Kirk. We had a really great session last month and focused again on career counseling, but just wanted a chance to have him share some updates about what that session looked like and who was there.
Hey, Rachel, thank you very much. So it was a great session. It was our second annual February convening. The first one we had was in 2023. That was virtual, so it was nice to be in person. It was at the Maritime Institute in Lincoln Heights, Maryland. The invited attendees included the LEAs, the local workforce boards, and our community college partners. One of the great things about this, in our opening session, we got to hear directly from Dr. Britt Kerwin on the vision of Blueprint, but specifically drilling down into what was the vision for career counseling and why the local workforce boards were asked to partner with the LEAs and the community colleges on this career counseling piece. And if anyone was there and heard them, it put everything into perspective. And we're hoping that there's other opportunities that we can hear directly from him, because he really set the stage for this. And it was a really good kickoff to a good day. Part of this was, the Maryland Workforce Association, in partner with the governor's CTE committee, has contracted with Educator Cooperative to do some technical assistance. So they really started talking about that technical assistance and really doing some deeper dive into where everyone is. We set the stage that this is an implementation year. So we're not really holding anyone accountable for major outcomes, except for getting your program up and running and staff and start building that partnership between the LEAs, the community colleges, and the local workforce boards. We also had Beacon to present a quick survey that we put out to kind of give us a benchmark to where we were. That survey led to a lot more questions. So we're in the process of working with Beacon to come up with a better survey to really showcase, what was this implementation year like? Where are all the LEAs and the local workforce boards and community colleges in saying of career counseling? So it's a very exciting day. We're continuing to meet with the CTE committee, Educator Cooperative, and Beacon to look at next steps. So look for more coming out around career counseling. So thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. It's really been exciting to watch this take off. Olivia, if there's any questions for me, happy to take those, but those are the high level updates.
Just a couple follow-ups regarding the submission of the plans from the LEAs. I know this year is a phased submission. Are there going to be technical assistance sessions for LEAs? I know the plan is to do it differently this year than last year. So is it, brief responses, longer responses? Tell us what you have.
Just to clarify, do you mean technical assistance specifically for the May 1 submission?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, what we've done this year is we've set aside dedicated time weekly to meet with Blueprint coordinators, and we're calling it office hours, but it's completely around the plan. And we've identified focus areas. So as of this week, we've made it through all 5 pillars. And then also we've been able to say, like, oh, a whole bunch of questions came up. We're going to need to do pillar 5 and follow back up on the questions that came up around pillar 3. And so we let them know in advance if there is a focus area in addition to the pillar focus area. so that they can bring people from the LEA that are working on that particular piece of it. At this point, that has been the extent of what was needed for technical assistance, what the LEAs have requested, that we've been able to get timely feedback each week and to kind of hear either the stumbling blocks or the challenges or get clarification on what's expected. So that will continue. At this point, we're back to broad. We don't have any like pillar 1, pillar 2 focuses, but we'll continue to do that as we hear from our colleagues around the state where they're needing more clarification or information.
Okay, thank you. So I want to make sure we have time to jump into our meeting. I know we have a lot to discuss today. And so I think the first thing we're going to do is get some information. Receive information from Molly. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep. And Rachel Stevens Parker from the Governor's Workforce Board. Can you all hear me okay?
Okay. Yes. Molly
Yeah,
and
okay.
Rachel.
Sorry. I'm on my or work Wi-Fi on a laptop here, so my computer's, of course, overheating right now. So, can I share my screen? I need the host to.
I'm going to
enable
go
it.
ahead. Yeah, let me fix that for you. 1 second.
Okay, thank you.
Can you try now, Molly?
Mm-hmm. All right. Let me just get in slideshow mode. Can you all see that okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you for having us, as always. As I said earlier, Molly Mesnard, Deputy Director of the CTE Committee and Executive Director of the Governor's Workforce Development Board. And we really want the apprenticeship framework that the CTE Committee released at our February meeting. And this is now open for public feedback. So we are also having, multiple stakeholder sessions, groups such as yourself, community colleges, LEAs, and so forth, to really walk through the apprenticeship guidance and what it means with respect to defining the 45% goal in the blueprint. And also today, we'll walk through sort of just some high level updates of the industry recognized credential framework. And basically, I'm not going to go into too much detail about that because I know Richard and I give a pretty in-depth presentation to you all back in January on that. So I'm just going to walk through some of the updates we made to the industry recognized credential definition and criteria as a result of the first public feedback session. So on this slide here, you all don't need me to tell you about the blueprint goals. But today we're really here to talk about number 4 and how the CTE committee really needs to define what industry recognized credentials and apprenticeships count in the 45% goal. And I'll turn it over to Rachel to walk through the apprenticeship framework.
Thanks so much, Molly. And, I think, coming into this body of work and really launching this process in earnest, about 5-6 months ago with the Career and Technical Education Committee, one thing that became really clear was centering ourselves around the ultimate goal of this work. And the goal behind the 45%, if we put it aside for a moment, is really about making sure that students have a pathway after they graduate, that they are on a clear career pathway, whether they are college bound, whether they're apprenticeship bound, whether they're graduating with other high quality industry recognized credentials already under their belts and with a clear next step. And so that's really the mindset we were taking as we went into the process of starting to develop this guidance. And I'll start just also by mentioning, we'll talk more at the end about next steps, but both of these pieces that we're presenting today are open for public comment as of Friday. They're available on our website as well as feedback forms. We're happy to make that information available as a follow-up to this as well for anyone who did not receive it, but we're really eager to get a lot of good input from a huge range of stakeholders on this framework. So to kind of recap, going to the apprenticeship piece of this, the charge set before the Career and Technical Education Committee of the Governor's Workforce Board was really, with the 45% goal at the top of the screen here in mind, we're kind of charged with making sure that as many students achieve that with a focus on apprenticeship. And so obviously, given the language around the high school level of a registered apprenticeship, first things first, there was a lot to do to really figure out how we wanted to define the term high school level of a registered apprenticeship and how we wanted to define what that means for not just the high school level of registered apprenticeship, but also for Maryland's Apprenticeship Maryland program, which is the youth apprenticeship program in Maryland that is not a registered apprenticeship, but that has been engaging an increasing number of students and employers in paid work-based learning opportunities. So it's something we were trying to tackle through this framework. And Molly, if you'll go to the next slide, please. The next slide kind of summarizes the key points of recommendations in the framework. First, after collaboration with many of our stakeholders, of course, within the Career and Technical Education Committee and also across state agencies, Richard and his team at MSDE, and of course, the apprenticeship team within the Department of Labor being really close partners every step of the way on this, we landed on these three initial recommendations that are now out for comment. The first is defining the high school level of registered apprenticeship as the high school portion of a school to apprenticeship program. School to apprenticeship is a registered apprenticeship program that already exists in Maryland with a number of students participating currently. It's essentially a registered apprenticeship program that begins in high school, starting with a student's junior year. And the second is we laid out some steps we think can help support expansion of school to apprenticeship as one of the really core elements of how we're going to achieve the Blueprint's 45% goal. Again, that kind of charge in the law on the prior slide around really focusing on apprenticeship within the goal. And then we also know that industry recognized credentials can add a lot of value. And so we want to build that into the youth apprenticeship program, the AMP youth apprenticeship program, in order to count toward this Blueprint goal for the 45%. And so that is the third recommendation, is to count youth apprenticeship participation when the youth apprenticeship earns an industry recognized credential or credit toward an industry recognized credential as defined by the CTE committee. Again, kind of calling back to some of the things we're charged with under the Blueprint and having that be when the youth apprenticeship program counts. And we believe this really helps bring the youth apprenticeship program into even greater alignment with some of the national and global best practices around youth apprenticeship programs in instances when they are not a full registered apprenticeship that continues after high school. Next slide, please. So to dig into that second piece a little bit more, we wanted to kind of highlight some existing tools and resources or capabilities out there in this guidance to help expand registered apprenticeship and especially school to apprenticeship under this guidance. And so a few of them are bulleted here. For instance, we know that part of the Blueprint's vision is to have career and technical education, among other things, able to provide related instruction for registered apprenticeship programs and to weave career and technical education into some of these registered apprenticeship pathways. We also know that schools are able to give credit toward a high school diploma for both on-the-job training and for the related instruction associated with the registered apprenticeship. And sometimes that guidance has not, in the past, historically always been super clear. So we wanted to elevate MSDE's guidance on that and talk about some of these other pieces as well. For instance, age not impacting worker compensation rates, pointing to existing guidance tools where we were able to, including funding opportunities that exist and partners that exist in the ecosystem to support employers, to support sponsors, et cetera. Next slide, please. And so that was kind of on existing tools, and we also wanted to point towards some additional actions. And so these are where we really, again, collaborated super closely with our partners in labor and in the Department of Education around what these recommendations can and should look like, what would be the best way to do the work, what is feasible, and what can really help drive progress toward our goals. And so you'll see these listed here. I won't go through every single one. Many of these are things that each of these departments are already working toward. And so really here we wanted to highlight that these are actions that the committee is supporting and that will be part of advancing these goals. So I'll pause here for just a moment, focusing clans over. And I'll talk a little bit more in a moment about the data and reporting piece. Next slide, please. And then, of course, again, back to that youth apprenticeship element, again, really looking at credit toward an industry recognized credential, and that can include credit toward a registered apprenticeship, where youth apprenticeship might articulate into a registered apprenticeship after high school, or ideally when youth apprentice earns by graduation an industry recognized credential. And we believe that weaving this into the youth apprenticeship program is feasible. Some programs already do it. It will mean a pretty substantial change for many existing AMP youth apprenticeship programs. And we are prepared, again, across our agency partners to support everyone in kind of making this transition for programs that'll count in the blueprint. And of course, there may also be youth apprenticeship programs that fall outside the 45% goal as well, which we do acknowledge. And really, again, the driver here being we want students to complete their apprenticeship experience in a youth apprenticeship program with a credential in addition to their diploma. And that we believe that, again, in keeping with kind of some of the international and national best practices, having an apprenticeship sort of term and title and stamp on a program, weaving in a credential will really kind of be in keeping with the spirit of the youth apprenticeship program and its sort of mirroring of many elements of registered apprenticeship, as registered apprenticeships do all conclude with a national industry recognized credential. So I will stop there, I think, on the kind of content. And we are, of course, I mentioned some next steps here. They're kind of here on the screen. The big one being we want a lot of input and feedback through conversations like this. So we're actually going to pause here and kind of happy to take questions, discuss this a little bit more before we move on to the industry recognized credentials update. The draft that is currently out for comment was approved by the committee. It was presented to the committee sort of as the final sort of initial draft and approved by them on February 28th. For us to then distribute for comment. And so the idea here is that we will have a 1-month public comment period, collect feedback, thoughts, questions, ideas, hear from people about what else they need this to say and do to support our apprenticeship goals, and integrate that into a final draft to be reviewed and hopefully approved by the CTE committee at their May public meeting. So I'll pause there and would love questions, comments, feedback, from the group at this time.
Thank you very much, Rachel and Molly, and no immediate question, although I'll tee up perhaps if she's available, Robin, here to speak in a moment for rurals. But just to put it into context, this is really helpful to us because our Pillar 3 committee, in endeavoring to provide informed feedback from our different constituents that we represent, this is the second of 4 pathways related to Blueprint CCR college and career readiness that we're considering. February was dual enrollment in early college. March is the CTE pathway, where IRCs and apprenticeship definitions and that path to 45% for LEAs are all important. And then April is APIB Cambridge pathway. May, the support pathway for those who aren't yet CCR ready. So we want to be able to provide you with that kind of specific feedback. And I always want to speak a word for the rurals out west and out east in Maryland, where there isn't quite as much density of businesses and partners, and where we have to kind of get creative with our partnerships to, especially if apprenticeship and those partnerships are the preferred path to the 45%. So I invite Robin, who is here on the Eastern Shore with me, if she's available, I know she's traveling, to say a word for feedback or questions.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And I'm also going to invite Danielle into this conversation because she's much more of an expert in apprenticeship than I am. But I've learned a lot from her this year. And I completely understand the value of school to apprenticeship. My concern is that it's not going to be sustainable, really not just in rural areas, but also more urban areas, because it's my understanding that STAs lead to employment. And we are struggling as it is to get AMP. And Danielle has done an incredible job of raising our AMP numbers from 1 student to 13 in 1 year. So, and that's just for AMP. We have a hard time getting small employers, small businesses to commit to AMP. So I'm really concerned that with STAs being the only recognized apprenticeship program, and that 45%, that all of the work that we've done to increase AMP will be in vain, because they won't count. And also my other concern, and I understand the value of an STA because it's leading to an adult apprenticeship, and that's really important for a lot of trades areas. But I'm afraid that we're missing the students who are not going to trades, but are also going into apprenticeships. So for areas like computer science, engineering, those require college degrees, but we are working hard to find apprenticeship programs because currently there aren't necessarily the best IRCs for them either that align to some of our curriculum. So we've been working to find those. We're not going to be able to get an STA for college-bound students in careers that are college-bound because the IRCs, quite frankly, require college level of degrees. So I'm concerned, this isn't really a question, this is more of a comment. I totally value STAs, but I don't necessarily think that they are the one size fits all for all careers. Like I would really hope that the committee would consider AMP for careers that it's not possible, or for industries that in our areas that it's not going to be possible for. And Danielle, if I've missed anything, please jump in because I've learned a lot from you and this process since you've taken over for Talbot.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head with everything that you said, Robin. And just even for some of the trades on the Eastern Shore in particular, and some of the rural areas, working, particularly just thinking about the electrical field. I was meeting with a company the other day, and they have 6 journeymen. They already have 3 that are working as adult registered apprenticeships, and that leaves 3 more spaces. And I think it's super limited with what we have on the Eastern Shore already. So to think trying to get to that 45%, I know that can happen in a number of ways. It's just having the capacity. It's just it seems very challenging.
100%. And I really appreciate you all raising these concerns. And I think there's a few elements of feedback kind of embedded in this that I'm taking notes on. And I think one thing else, I want to say a few things in response and to encourage sort of additional, if you have additional responses or even detailed feedback, and for those listening as well, to provide feedback on these points. I think first on the sort of, there's not this endless demand for multi-year apprenticeships, right? There's a finite number of jobs. And as we move people into apprenticeships that are longer term, that means that won't be open for a few years at least, right? And so so one thing the committee is doing kind of once we have a framework in place is working with our LMI team, our labor market information team at the Department of Labor, and of course the committee and other partners to develop some benchmark kind of goals. How are we going to get to 45%? And when we talk about that, I want to address the second point, which is Danielle and Robin, we completely agree that there's not a one size fits all for every career path, for every occupation, for every employer. And that was why we did not limit this to just school to apprenticeship. That is why we carved out a very specific place for youth apprenticeship that's not registered, that may end at high school in the guidance that we've put forward. We do feel there's a chance to enhance the quality outcomes for students by integrating industry recognized credentials or credit toward an industry recognized credential. And I hope you see a lot of opportunity carved out in there. And I think we would love feedback on what should be counted in that space. What we don't want is, an excuse not to explore new skills first pathways for students. We do believe that there are pathways out there. We've seen other states and regions starting to integrate apprenticeships, whether it's into degree programs that help students access degree programs that maybe they couldn't access before, or into occupations that maybe have required college degrees in the past, but don't actually need a college degree to have the skills for the job. And that's part of, a movement that the entire administration and that many of our partners across the state, I'm sure including all of you, are really passionate about. So we recognize that there's a balance here between kind of pushing to advance the ball in that area while recognizing and there's no one program that's going to be one size fits all for everybody. And we really gave a lot of thought to how to try to strike the balance between the tension of, pushing forward for more skills-based approaches like apprenticeship, more pathway options for students, with ensuring that we weren't being overly prescriptive in a different direction and saying, well, now instead of only college being acceptable, it's just college and registered apprenticeship, right? We know that there's going to need to be some flexibility and some places where those two things are also integrated and a student can be on a pathway that offers them multiple directions. So all that is to say, I hope that is clear in looking at the framework. And if it's not, we need to know, because we need to know that what we're trying to convey is getting across. That's really so important to us in this. And you'll see when you read it, we tried not to make it a too long, technical, wonky of a document. We wanted it to be clear and accessible. So anywhere where we have failed is very important to us to identify through this feedback process. And again, when it comes to how we're thinking about fitting youth apprenticeship into this, how we're thinking about the feasibility of expanding registered apprenticeship, I've taken notes on the comments so far, but some, detailed feedback on those points will continue to be really helpful. It's exactly what we want through this process. And I think those were the things I wanted to make sure I hit on. So thank you. All that is to say, thank you for the chance to kind of talk about that and elevate these concerns. And I'm sorry, there's one more thing I did want to note on the data side. We're talking about all these programs, and one thing that really struck us as we sort of started diving in was we're talking about what to do with these programs without a lot of good data on the outcomes they deliver for students right now. We don't really have a good sense of like a long-term trajectory. What do different credential programs deliver? What do different types of apprenticeship programs, youth apprenticeship, school to apprenticeship, deliver for high school students longer term when it comes to their employment or college or career outcomes. So there are some points made in the guidance around things that the committees, they're kind of framed as recommendations. Many of them are things the Department of Labor and MSD are working on to improve the data kind of gathering capacity around the youth apprenticeship program in particular. So that's something we're looking at too, because we believe that making big decisions that totally shifted us in one direction or another, which I think kind of, we're making some big strides here, but we didn't want to, we acknowledge the need for that type of data to really make informed decisions in the future. And so I am also excited to see as we integrate industry recognized credentials, expand school to apprenticeships, in the places that's feasible and where we can start doing that quickly, getting that outcomes data will give us all a lot more information that we need for making any other decisions like this in the future. So I welcome any response to that or other questions on that or I love this conversation. It's super important to us.
I just wanted to add about the flexibility of IRCs.
Yeah.
I think the problem there is that IRCs are still being developed. And if you look at the IRC list that's in draft, a lot of those I'm under the impression would be finished after some extensive education in apprenticeship. So for some of the programs that I'm mentioning, they're really, an IRC isn't available for them. So we're really at this crossroads where my concern is we're going to find ourselves with students that we're more concerned with getting towards a number and towards 45% than we are with what they need at that time. I've seen a lot of great outcomes with AMP, and at the end of the day, for a lot of the students that Danielle has placed in AMP, it works for a high school student. I mean, they are still, I think it's important to remember that these are still 17-year-olds in some aspects who are still students. They're still kids. They still are involved in high school activities. And I always thought that the point of apprenticeship and internships and work-based learning was to give students the skills that they need to be career and college ready, not necessarily always walking out with an IRC. It depends on what that student needs and what the career is. And we are lucky in Maryland that we have so many different career pathways that there's always the what if, because we have so many different career options and it looks different for different students. I'm just worried that we're starting to look at this as numbers and checking off to like different categories here. Well, this is an STA, this is not. But at the end of the day, we want kids to come out of this with experience. And I'm just really worried that kids who would benefit, for students that could benefit from AMP or are benefiting from AMP are going to lose opportunities for that because we're going to be so hyper focused on, well, we need to find a pathway for you to get an IRC, or we need to find a pathway for you to get an STA, and there isn't an STA available for this because we don't have the employers for this. I'm concerned that that will be an unintended consequence. Like, I am all for us providing IRCs for students so that they're leaving us with credentials and that they're leaving us with the skills that they need. But I think that we also need to remember that they are still kids. And that was the beauty of AMP, because AMP gave them does give them the flexibility of a high school schedule, of just getting a taste of what that career is like and still completing on the job training. I'm trying to understand the rationale of removing AMP from the goal, from the 45% goal.
It's very fair. And I will say there are two things. We didn't remove AMP. We changed an element of what type of AMPs will be included in the goal. And the goal is the goal stated in the law is for 45%. And going back to the text of the law, which is currently unamended, it is for a high school level of a registered apprenticeship or an industry recognized credential. And so that's where we got into the credit toward a credential or a registered apprenticeship or achieving an IRC for that AMP qualification. It's not necessarily to say that there will never be AMPs out there that don't include those things, that might not count in the tally for this 45% goal, but might be doing great things for students. That's outside of the jurisdiction of the guidance on this goal. I do think you're asking and raising a really valid concern around, well, what does that mean in implementation if schools are then kind of, and all these partners are encouraged to really only focus on this 45%. And that is honestly that's a question I think we all have to kind of continuously work through together as we work to implement an increase in, because I do think at the end of the day, we want students to get experience. We want an increasing number of students to have a pathway option in addition to a college option, right? Like another career pathway option or a few available to them while they're in high school. And yet I very much hear what you're saying, that there are going to be students who benefit without an IRC woven into that, but who would really benefit from it. And I do think that's something we're going to have to keep working on.
So I misspoke. I totally forgot about the part. Sorry, I'm doing this on my phone, so I don't have anything in front of me. But AMP with an IRC, and I'm just going to put this in perspective. We increased our AMP, like I said, from 1 to 13. None of our current AMP students have an IRC, because it's just, again, the type of careers that our students are being placed in. And I feel like Talbot is really strategic also with the way we have AMP. We try to also use AMP, because we're a small county, to give apprenticeships for the programs that we don't offer because we're so small. So like Danielle mentioned, electricity, we don't offer an electrician's program. So we really try to find programs so that we can expand more programs for our, on the shore, since we don't have as many. But we would go from increasing, just to put in perspective for everyone that's listening, from 1 to 13 students in a year, which I think is like tremendous improvement, because all along we've been told to, keep trying to add apprenticeship sites, keep, plugging away at this. And now it's like none of that would count. And it's not just about like accounting. We feel like we're doing really good things. Danielle's doing amazing things for students. They're coming out of this with great experiences. But I feel like that just gives an indication of, with the way that that's defined, of how that turns out in numbers for a county like us, that we would go from 13 to 0.
For Blueprint for the 45% goal. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Because a lot of them don't get an IRC with this, because all of their focus with the education of it is for related instruction. So they're working with us to get the related instruction. Some of our employers are providing that related instruction, because like I said, we don't offer all the programs. Some of the times it's not like our classes that are going directly to a career, because we're trying to fill in some gaps for programs that we don't have. So we're already relying on our employers, our business partners, to fill that education in with some related instruction. And they don't have time in that amount of time to also provide an IRC. And sometimes it's not an appropriate IRC for the level of, depending on what the career is, it's just not appropriate for that age level. Right. So again, like tying that IRC to the AMP and making that a requirement in our world, that's basically taking out AMP as an option. Like the way that it's defined for us, and I'm just speaking for Talbot County, and Danielle, you can jump in if I'm wrong. But the way that that is defined of all of those different options, basically for us, where we're at is that we'd have to turn everything into STAs. And we're not in the position to do that because we're already asking a lot from our employers as it is. It's been really challenging, but we have really been trying to do our best to get out there and improve our numbers and to make awareness. And we've been in the community, we've been with Rotary clubs, we've been doing all the work. And that whole time it's been to get AMP. And now it's kind of like the rug's been pulled from under us, is a lack of a better term, that it's like, this is changing and now we have to take it up a step more. And it's just feels like we went up one step and went back 5, if that makes sense. And I understand why STAs are great. Students can go directly to a career, but we also need to remember that not all students are, or some careers just aren't appropriate for students to do that. And there's not always an IRC. Like every situation is different with some of these careers. And in our case, I can tell you we have a variety of different careers within those 13 students this year, and none of them have an IRC.
Yeah.
So if I may interrupt briefly, I just want to acknowledge that we're 45 minutes in and we have 45 minutes remaining and many, many good perspectives on the call that I want to invite in. This is extremely valuable, though, the conversation for us to get into this detail, and I'm grateful for it. Rachel, when you speak at Chesapeake College in a few weeks, it's going to be with Robin and attending and 4 of our other support counties. And that's really the landscape you will occupy you'll be able to see the physical faces, the individuals of the business owners that Robin's talking about. And here in this sparsely populated area, a lot of times it was so for P-TECH and it's so for other things. The legislated noble outcomes fall against fewer resources than they envision. And so it's just helpful to acknowledge that at some level. But I also want to acknowledge that we're not the only part of the state, and that's not the only goal of this call. Part of what we'll do is envision how to make these things successful in the 45 minutes we have to come. But I want to pause on this point and see if there are other perspectives, other voices out there where we try to think about how to incentivize businesses to partner and to make these placements that are necessary. Because it's a tough pull. It's a long on ramp to 45% for some of our LEAs.
Yeah.
I don't know if out west in Allegheny, I don't know if there are others who have comments in their pocket that they'd like to share, but I want to make sure that that door's open or that window's open for them.
I appreciate that, but I will tell you, out west, I concur with Robin and Danielle. It is going to be so difficult because of the lack of businesses that we do have out here. The people that, when we do have a good business model that's out there for students to go and to certainly be part of that, they won't take that many of them. So we're going to be hurting for the number of students who are going to be able to go into that. So I concur with Robin and Danielle for what they were saying, especially for East. It's happening out west as well.
Yeah, no, I know. And I this is really valuable input. And I 2 things I want input on as we go through this. And like, if you guys have chances to do written feedback as well, so that's fully captured, or, I mean, we'll replay this back too. On the 45% kind of like targets that we're meant to set with this framework and kind of how are we going to get there, there's also meant to be some level of local and regional targeting, imagining some variation so that it's probably not the case every school's at 45%. It might be the case that some places are at different, higher or lower than that somewhere in the future. And that's something we envision doing in partnership as opposed to the committee like sitting in a room and just like picking numbers. We want to be out there doing that with each jurisdiction when we get to that phase of the work. And so this is all kind of, I'm putting it in the bank for when we are at that stage, because it's really important to keep this stuff in mind. And I did also just want to say feedback on the kind of, you know, when it's or credit toward an apprenticeship or industry recognized credential, whether that's from the on-the-job training hours an AMP apprentice is doing or from the related instruction hours. I do really want feedback on how we can unpack that and better understand what the right opportunities are to fall within that category, because I imagine there might be opportunities for some of these things to account in a way that they just haven't yet. Again, maybe not for every AMP, but I think that's something I would love, love, love detailed feedback on. Again, maybe it's not here today, but that I'd really like that input on.
Thank you. We will take note. And I want to acknowledge Kirkland has
Yes.
raised his hand, and I think Rebecca had a hand
Oh, I'm sorry.
after that. Yes.
So good afternoon, everyone. I mean, this is a good conversation. And my comment is kind of related to this, but kind of not related to this. What I keep hearing is in some of the rural areas, it's hard to set up high school level apprenticeships, no matter if it's AMP or school to apprenticeship, because you're going one business at a time and trying to get one business to set up an apprenticeship. We know that that's difficult to do. Have you guys worked with your community colleges or your local workforce boards to have them to be sponsors of apprenticeships where you can get multiple businesses to join a group sponsorship instead of going one by one to businesses, which would increase the opportunities for the number of apprenticeships with minimum effort? I mean, you're not having each business sit there and trying to set up their own apprenticeship and monitor, especially if we do go to school to apprenticeship, where there's a lot more, possibly a lot more paperwork involved. But leveraging your local workforce boards, your community college, you know, for example, Howard Community College, they are the sponsor of an apprenticeship program, and they're bringing multiple businesses in. Anne Arundel County, the local workforce board, we're in the process of being the sponsor for that various reasons. Because you're right, small businesses, they don't have the time to do this, and it's harder. But I think if you look at this more group apprenticeship model, it would really be successful with you. Doesn't matter if you're doing AMPS or if you're doing school to apprenticeship. Just a thought.
I appreciate that you got the shameless community college plug in there that I usually have to bring. So thank you, Kirkland.
I'm starting, I mean, I've been spending a lot more time with community colleges, so I'm starting to really advocate for them, and especially in this apprenticeship world. I mean, they play a very valuable role in this apprenticeship. So
We just that event where Rachel will speak includes all the 5 county CTE programs, their directors and faculty, and the Chesapeake College CTE faculty and the Workforce Investment Board together collaborating, because we do have to share resources and conversations and PAC meetings, you know, and local advisory. So we're working as tightly together as we can. It's a great word, and I appreciate what you're saying there.
And I'll just add to that, Kirk, it made me think, you know, I think we could certainly highlight that more as one of the resources. And, you know, one piece in our guidance document that we tried to convey is that we know that, you know, this should not be on the shoulders solely of LEAs to be out there recruiting employers and doing this. And so we tried to convey that. But again, in your guys' feedback, if that's like not coming through clearly enough, you know, explain that out, but also, you know, what sort of resources are available that could be helpful for us to share with a greater audience, and then also what resources you're going to need. And so kind of just thinking through some of that as well, that will be helpful for us.
Are there other thoughts or comments in folks' back pockets unshared?
I did have my hand raised earlier. I kind of feel like it's been said, but I do represent Southern Maryland. So we're Charles County, the biggest of the 3 counties down here. We have like what our business portfolio looks like is 75% of our businesses have 3 to 4 employees. So it's a huge struggle. And we have been trying to work with putting a lot of work into the partnership between our community college and our workforce development, trying to bring in also, I know we have a base down here that's in big need of increased employment. So we've really been trying some things. I do feel that this is new work for a lot of these organizations. So it just feels very, very new. And as we navigate it, it's a constant process, and it seems that the work is, it takes a bit to get people to understand, and you make progress. So I think we're building capacity of our community to understand the information and the knowledge around apprenticeship and things like that, and for them to understand what we're actually talking about and try to get that out there. But as far as the capacity to meet the 45% in that regard, I just have to be honest that we'll be constantly probably leaning toward IRCs, right? Because to reach the 45% in the area of apprenticeship is going to be few and far between in our region. And so when we talk about IRCs, that then filters into the current point where we are. We had previous career exploration, these CTE programs and fields that led to college credits. As Robin had spoke to, some of the IRCs are a little down the line. They're too advanced for our high school students. And so that means that what we're saying is those fields aren't going to be what we're putting our supports into in the high school realm for those students to explore. And so as we talk about all this and we put these definitions around it, unfortunately, where the data points are is where really supports end up getting placed. And so what we may end up seeing as another one of these results is limitations in the offerings and the explorations of our students in these fields that would necessitate a college level of education prior to them reaching the level of mastery to be able to check that box on a certification. So it's just something to keep in mind.
Thank you. And I think, when you're looking at the guidance, I really want feedback on like, where is this going to limit, recognizing this goal is like to maybe get to 45% of students across the state. Where is this going to limit students who should be exploring pathways too much, right? Like, where is this going to just bump us up against something that's untenable? Recognizing that the 45% goal is, again, not 100%. So keeping that in mind, but again, acknowledge that's still a huge number of students. That's still a lot. So thank you for raising that point. I do want to say it might be a good transition point. Potentially, I don't want to cut this part off, but to the IRC, since you brought us there, Rebecca, obviously these things kind of work together, which is why we've been approaching them kind of in tandem. And on the industry recognized credential side, we've really been working closely with MSD and leaning on our partners there to kind of understand existing processes, to examine quality criteria that have been applied with good degrees of success in other places, and look at what that could look like in Maryland, which is in the now second iteration of public comment on the guidance that you see now with a sample list attached, as you indicated. And obviously these things feeding into the 45% together, potentially, impacting, what programs on the industry recognized credential side, MSDE's list would also impact programs with Perkins support. So I think with that, if there are other points on the apprenticeship that you all want to really convey, let's do it. But otherwise, I think maybe we could turn to the credential piece.
Thank you.
Okay. And then in closing, I'll turn over to Molly. I'll just say, in case I don't get to right at the end of our whole deal here, thank you all very much for being tough on this and for really conveying what you think. I want to continue to encourage that, and I hope that is very clear. So if you think of things after, or things you really want to say, or information you want to share with us, anything at all, Molly and I are here for all of that outreach. So thank you again for the conversation, and I'll turn it over to Molly and Richard for IRCs.
All right, thank you all. I am going to move quickly through this since, as I said, we've already done a detailed presentation. And also I left my laptop charger at home and my laptop is dying. So I am going to quickly try to get through the slides, and if I cut out or anything like that, I'll jump over to Rachel's office or hop on my phone. But you all know sort of the background here of how, the proposed industry recognized credential definition and criteria came about. Really reviewing best practices across the U.S. And that was pretty much last fall, and then presented that to the committee and then opened that up for feedback. And we received, over 140 responses and really took the survey responses, thematically coded it, and really tried to uplift, recurring themes or concerns or thoughts that we saw throughout those survey responses, and then revised our industry recognized credential definition and criteria as a result of that. Kind of thinking through recurring themes and kind of coming back to, okay, how did this state handle this? And kind of bringing that into ours. So what we ended up with, we originally had 10 core criteria, if you all recall, and we've narrowed that down to 7 required and 2 preferred. And I'll go through that in just a moment. And we have opened up this second updated draft for a second public comment period of 2 weeks. That opened Friday and will close at the end of this month. And at the end of this, I'll have the survey links as well for you all, but then also obviously feel free to share with anyone. Here is the updated definition of the industry recognized credential. The main point I'll point out here that we updated was adding the regional in-demand occupations, I think in our discussions with you all and certainly with a lot of survey responses, noting that there is, there's local and regional in-demand occupations that might not necessarily match the statewide Maryland in-demand occupations. And so recognizing that was important to us. And then here are the required criteria aligned with in-demand occupations. Again, this one, the primary change was incorporating the local in-demand occupations, especially with respect to working with the local workforce development board and defining that. Documented outcomes, the primary change here was just sort of noting that there are going to be instances where there might not be data available to showcase documented outcomes. And then also there may be instances where, it says positive wage outcomes. So, where someone may be earning, let's say less than a living wage, maybe earning minimum wage, for instance, a childcare worker earning their CDA, making minimum wage. So, we understand that there are going to be some that may not show that positive wage outcome on the onset, but the idea is they're entering into a career pathway that would have that eventual wage progression. And then, sorry, my screen just changed. Okay, validated by industry, that pretty much stayed the same. And then we also have assessment-based and standards-driven. Most of these stayed pretty much the same, maybe tweaking a few words here or there. Attainable and accessible, and then portable. Again, kind of adding that regional work verbiage. And so that's the 7 required criteria. And then the 2 that we moved to preferred were the stackable and renewable, and sort of updated the definitions there. The 1 core criteria that we removed was the quality assurance. And really that was just a result, again, of the survey feedback kind of pointing out that was pretty duplicative of some of the criteria that was already there. So it didn't seem as necessary. And as everyone's noted, so in our updated framework, we also include sort of this initial cut of about 200, a little over 200 credentials that would be approved under this updated criteria. And we're also working with MSDE. There's sort of a gray list, as we're calling it, of some credentials where we just didn't have enough information at the time when we met with the CTE committee in February to list on there. So we're still reviewing those. And the idea is that, we're going to incorporate both industry recognized credential feedback and then of course the apprenticeship feedback, but I'll circle back to that in a second. But again, opening up for a second public comment period, updating our guidance, and then publishing a final list for the CTE committee to approve at their May meeting. And this would be for the 2025-26 school year. And the guidance document goes into more detail on the process and timelines and so forth. So again, would just open that up for anyone to review and then submit their comments in the link there. And additionally, when it comes to the apprenticeship, so we have opened that for a 30-day public comment period, so there'll be more time. And then also just doing, stakeholder engagement sessions, such as this one here, with our various partners across the state to really sort of workshop through, this is what we're presenting, and then, in live time, get some of this feedback and discussion. So I think that's, and then this is just a reminder where we are, what we're sort of working towards here. And as Rachel touched on, we do have a sort of benchmarking report that will be due in June, as well as our second implementation plan. And, you know, the idea of these two companion pieces, hold on here, is they're all sort of leading towards, you know, our CTE framework, which we'll also be working on, which we are also working on, and really just the blueprint strategic vision for what CTE and really what the entire education system is looking like across Maryland. So, anyways, just looking forward to your guys' feedback, and I'm gonna stop sharing.
Molly, would you add those please to the chat? Thank you for those links, those public comment links.
Yep, I'll add them to this chat. I'll also send around a PDF of the slides as well, so you guys have that. And I think I also sent, you should have all received just sort of our public survey email. And so feel free to, you know, forward that on to anyone as well. And I can resend that to anyone who didn't get it.
Yep, got it. Thank you.
Can I ask a question about the IRCs real quick?
Of course.
This may be a silly question, but when I was looking at the draft list, there are quite a few, especially under health and science or biomedical science, I forget how it's listed, but that are really not, like, they're high graduate level IRCs, like physician's assistant, physical therapist, those types. Why are those, why of that level is it on that list when it's not possible to obtain in high school? I'm just curious. I'm sure that is it just to show that they would go towards that path?
So that list was actually taken from MSDE's original approved list. So presumably that was connected to a program of study. And so basically what we did, and Richard can speak to this more, but we took MSDE's original approved list, which had maybe 500 or so, and then that's how we reviewed the credentials that are on that list. So pretty much everything on that list should have at some point been linked to a CTE program of study. So those ones in particular, I think, you know, again, when it comes to the survey, you know, giving feedback on that so we can kind of look into it more. And I know Richard and I have discussed, you know, we're happy to, you know, meet with anyone to kind of talk through, okay, this is how this met the criteria and so forth. And additionally, also I'll say, you know, Richard and his team are going to be working on sort of like a crosswalk of the credentials and sort of what programs of study they align to and so forth. So there's a lot of things in development over the next year, but that sort of resources to help link that up.
Richard,
thanks. That really helps clear that, because I know that there was a lot of confusion. I'm, you know, that list of 500, I think for years we've always just focused on the ones that like are in our program, and, you know, because there's 500. So I don't think a lot of us realized that that level was even there.
Yeah, hopefully a shorter list will help with that.
Richard, did you want to add anything at all, or?
Nope, Molly was incredibly comprehensive.
Awesome. And I know your team obviously super involved in like taking the criteria and going through the list and developing the criteria in the first place. So I just wanted to give you guys a shout out and thank you for that too. And yeah, this is helpful feedback for sure.
The collaboration has been wonderful. I will say that the resources are scarce. You know, just to use Kirk's example, we would have to hire another person to be an apprenticeship sponsor at Chesapeake College, and our budget just got cut at the state level. But we are having conversations with our LEAs and with local business and industries and with our workforce board that we have never had before, and it's been wonderful. And to see MSDE collaborating so closely with the CTE committee, wonderful. So there's good out there, but the ability for us to kind of talk to you and understand what's behind the definitions and the policies and the guidance and to provide feedback on that is really helpful. So Pillar 3 will digest this stuff and distill it down into, you know, bulleted recommendations or suggestions that come from our different, you know, constituent groups and send it back to you within this comment period. As a collective, but also individuals. So I thank you for that opportunity. It's helpful.
We appreciate you taking the time to do that and organize that. It's going to be super helpful to us. Thank you.
Are there other comments and questions on the call? I'm gonna have to jump to, at 4:15, I'm gonna be mostly on audio and video mute because I'll be traveling. So are there other comments and questions I'll call for here? Unsaid, unspoken yet? I'm going to share my screen briefly and make sure that, like, I have some of these notes are always editable, but if you can see that, you know, this is very much in the spirit of providing feedback that's actually helpful when we do. So I invite this to be edited, but I'll share the links as you share them, but I think what you said was, where might these definitions limit students, and then get specific? What solutions or strategies would be helpful? You know, how can we get there? Flexibility has been the name of implementation, and you've acknowledged that even today, as you say, one region varies and differs from another. So appreciate that, and we hear that loud and clear. But are there other bullets or emendations that you would recommend here? Because this is going to help inform the feedback we provide.
Yeah, thank you. I think just on that second bullet, I would kind of almost a sub bullet to it is really, it's really across the board. You know, thinking about whether it's policy or guidance that needs to be more clear, or whether it's like, we don't have funding to do certain things that if we had X, Y, or Z, we could do more registered apprenticeships, right? Or more industry recognized credentials or what have you. Those types of things are helpful to know. And I will also add, I think for us, it'll be, and our committee members, it'll be really helpful to hear from experts around the, under the AMP criteria, kind of what impact that would have, any information or data folks do have available, maybe in their individual jurisdictions on outcomes so far, would definitely help us unpack that. And understanding sort of, you know, what types of credit, what could credit toward a registered apprenticeship or industry recognized credential look like? What you suggest that look like if we stick with that kind of framing for the AMP youth apprenticeship counting toward the 45% goal? Those are a few pieces we're especially interested in feedback on, but obviously want to hear. Oh, and the last one, does it all make sense? Is it clear when you're out there talking to employers or partners? How hard is it to talk about registered apprenticeship versus youth apprenticeship? Is it easy? Are the challenges somewhere else down the line? Some of you mentioned kind of getting employers or getting people on board with the concept. Are there tools, FAQs, myth busting? The tools can scale from like tiny, small, easy to do to like, you know, big money things that you would need. We just want to know and gather that input, even if it doesn't all go into the guidance, but it's things we need, maybe things we need to know for, you know, recommendations we're supposed to put forward in the future, things like that. Thank you for the question. Oh, and Richard, sorry, I saw you come off mute.
I'm just gonna, so we just ended on Friday our spring MCTA sort of convening with LEA directors across the state as well. And one of the things that, you know, would also be helpful as I guess we're all thinking through the work is, you know, maybe I am not a good reader. Maybe this is why literacy is so important for people like me, but when I read the blueprint, it doesn't say education needs to hold the bag for 45%. It says the state does. And so I guess as part of the process, you know, thinking through, you know, how are we building in supports along the way? Because, you know, Dave is working with students at community college, right? Our LEA folks are working with students at high schools. And on top of that work, I also want to make sure that there is good supports that are being built into the guidance that maybe help us understand swim lanes really clearly of who does what. And sort of, you know, putting my LEA hat on for just a moment, and this is sort of what guides my work here with my team, is when this is implemented, what happens next, right? And so when we talk about, you know, our LEAs working with their local workforce boards, like, are the local workforce boards working with their LEAs, right? Like it's a two-way question. Like as community colleges and LEAs are working to identify employers, is labor and the workforce board and others working to find employers as well? And so making sure that the guidance is just really clear that we all live or die by 45%, the entire system, right? And so I want to make sure that that message is elevated. And I know that when we have conversations sort of internally, you know, this is the acknowledgement, but I also think sometimes it's important for people to feel like the work's not happening to them, that it's happening with them, and that there is support.
Richard, can I say that I appreciate that sentiment so much, and that's why you will always be a member of this group, because I think sometimes from an LEA standpoint, when we see our accountability measures, they are very public and they are very open, and they are just kind of focused to the LEA. Like, this is what you have to do to get to 45%. And we have all kinds of public measures as it relates to that. But part of my question for this and all the other portions of the blueprint as well is it absolutely is state legislation, but being able to see that visibility that's there for the LEAs, being able to see that in every other aspect. And so is there a dashboard for, let's say, businesses or workforce board? Like, this is what we've done and this is how we've supported the LEAs. The same thing for the colleges. Like, there's so many pieces to this, but I feel like sometimes when we see the reporting and the accountability, it is on the area of the LEA.
And I will say for mine, that's really helpful to understand, honestly, because we're obviously coming at this from a different place, and I hear that's a really interesting thought and idea. Thank you. It's really important. Sorry, Kirk.
No, I mean, I think Richard's point is a very good point. I mean, it is, we're all in this together. And I mean, I think that's what that convening was about. It's about all of us. How do we build that muscle working together? I know that that the local workforce boards are committed to working with the LEAs to make sure they're successful. Even though the career counseling funding does not support this 45% goal, but I know all 12 of my colleagues have talked about how they can make sure that they're supporting with this high school level apprenticeship. I mean, Anne Arundel County, we're blessed that we have the Maryland Works grant. That we partner with Anne Arundel Community College, that we are charged with creating the opportunities. We had several opportunities that were just passed at the most recent, apprenticeship council meeting. And, with our prospect list, we're going to have about 20 applications ready for the next meeting. So, I mean, we're all in this together. And as far as dashboards on Pillar 3, I mean, this is one of the things that we're working with Beacon on, is that dashboard. This is more around the career coaching part, but it all depends on how you interpret the law when they say that career coaching and putting the local workforce boards really responsible for career coaching and bringing on the career coaches, even though some of them have left the funding with the LEAs. I think we're on front and center on that dashboard around the career coaching piece of it. So, my point is we're in this all together. So it's not just on the LEA. So Olivia, I think your point is well made. But please know LEAs aren't the only ones that are front and center on this whole Pillar 3 thing. I think we're all in this together.
I just wanted to add one other thing. And I know I've brought this up before, but I think that we really need to figure out a way to have, and I know that these are all open for feedback, but if there's any way that we can have some organized feedback of the experts in these different careers to look at both IRCs and the apprenticeship from all of those perspectives, because I can speak out from what I know in my district, but I don't know every career, and I only know from my experience as an LEA. I really think it would be valuable to have experts in the careers across Maryland to look at our list of IRCs and to look at the definition of apprenticeship as we move forward. I know it's out for public, but if there's a way to organize that so that it's deliberately going to experts across the state, I think that would be some of the most meaningful feedback we could get.
Yeah, and Kirk, I see your hand up. I did just want to quickly on that point say yes, and we want that type of feedback too. We have, when it went out Friday, disseminated it to our local board partners and to chambers to help disseminate to businesses. We also know that, you know, there are PACs that can get this too, who are obviously already super engaged in this. So we also would love help in doing that in an organized way. We have this kind of going out, you know, on the general register of things that are open for comment, but we know not everybody that we want to hear from is going to see that. Kirk, sorry.
No, Rachel, I mean, I agree 100% what you just said, and I agree with what Robin's point is. I mean, you know, Ryan Sackett in Anne Arundel County, you know, we had talked about how do we get businesses input into this with the businesses from the local workforce boards and the businesses that are on the LACs and PACs to look at this and give that feedback. So, you know, 30 days is a very short time period, but I understand why you guys are on that short time period and all that. But as much as maybe the Governor Workforce Board and the CTE committee working with the local workforce boards to get some of that feedback. You know, Rachel, not that I asked you to do this again, but you did a great job in pulling us all together by regions to get input on the state plan. Maybe we can, you know, try to work together, at least get some of the workforce boards, you know, together to kind of get feedback on this and see. I mean, you know, ultimately, I mean, we got to always keep in mind, yes, there are outcomes that are being put on the LEAs and on the local workforce boards, but ultimately what this whole blueprint thing is to make sure that we're better preparing students to go into the workforce. So whose input is most valuable? It is employers. So be able to make sure that they are giving feedback on this.
Thank you. I love that idea.
Olivia, are you on hand to bring us home?
This was a spirited discussion today.
Yes.
Absolutely. So our next meeting topic is APIB, I believe. And so we'll talk about the APIB pathways next time. And we really thank all of our guests, our invited guests. We look forward to our next discussion. And is there any other comment before we close?
I just will share a consolidated version of our notes with the Pillar 3 committee for editing and adjustment so that we can provide collective feedback in addition to our individual.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Dave. All right, well, we are going to end. It is 4:23, and we will end. Again, thank you to everyone who has come in. We will see you in our April meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, Rachel, I'm turning off the recording now.
Good job. Did you also turn off